how does En Place on Netflix encourage us to be radical?
Débarque dans 24 heures à l'Elysée.
Est-ce que t'as de quoi noter les codes?
Les codes.
Kista, tiré du bas, Bendo 77.
C'est ça les codes nucléaires?
Non, c'est le code Wi-Fi.
Stéphane Blair is a youth worker who grew up in the suburbs of Paris. He is of Ivorian descent and grew up with a single mother who accidentally ends up running for president in France. And basically, the series follows, is France ready for a black president? He's caught speaking out against another candidate called Eric Andre, calls him out for increasing spending on CCTV but decreasing spending on housing and social care. He expresses how he and his community aren't represented in politics. And social media sees Stéphane Blair talk about this and basically catapults him into running. And season 1 follows Stéphane and his team on navigating the journey as a black candidate in the political race. Season 2 follows his candidacy and basically his struggles with people questioning his legitimacy. He's trying to secure the legislative elections, he's dealing with diplomacy and attempts on him and his family's life, and actually trying to follow through on the things he said he would provide during his presidential candidacy. In terms of actually moving past the title, encouraging us to be radical, I'd say the show encourages us to challenge political systems, because I'd say radical would be more breaking down the whole system in itself. The term radical would just be used for the sake of the title, just to give it a bit of that wow factor. Before I get on to the whole political understanding, the whole political unpacking of the show, I really do recommend the show, even as a light watch. Cleverly written. There's not really other shows like that right now. And je pense que mon français s'est amélioré, vraiment. So you want to improve your French, you want to laugh, you also want to learn. En place, man. En place. More context into the show. It was created by Jean-Pascal Zadi.
Et je m'appelle Jean-Pascal Zadi.
He is a director/actor. He was born in France but comes from Ivory Coast. Initially started out in a rap group called La Cellule and began directing in 2005 with a documentary about independent French rap. In 2021, he received the César Award for Most Promising Actor for his performance in Simply Black, which he also wrote and directed. So Represent on Netflix basically explores the political environment in France via comedy when a black man enters the political race. It currently has 2 seasons and apparently a third is on the way. We cross our fingers and hope. It's really obvious that the show is political because it's surrounding the French political system, the French political environment. As well as my interpretation, Jean-Pascal Zadi himself said how the show can be used to expand people's imagination and plant a seed for new political possibilities in France. And I think the show can be applied to other countries as well in Western Europe. There's a lot of similarities that could definitely be applied to a British political context as well. So getting deeper into the premise of the show. So season 1 follows Stéphane and his team navigating the journey as a black candidate, and season 2 follows his candidacy and the struggles of people questioning his legitimacy. In terms of Stéphane's team, we've got his mum, Simone, we've got a man called William, we've got Mo, his cousin, we've got Lamine, who is one of his mentees, who he worked with when he was a youth worker. We've got Yasmin, she's probably the most experienced person on the team. She's also a hijabi woman of North African descent. And we finally got Didier, who's just Didier. You have to watch the show to understand who Didier is. In terms of the candidates that we have, that Stéphane Blair is running up against, we have Eric, who is a centre-left, and he talks about pacing ourselves, not wanting to sleep with diversity. We've got Friend Conyard, who is representing the far right. The main issues that he believes he wants to tackle is immigration, if it sounds familiar, because it's supposed to be. And we also have Corinne, who is the only woman running. She is a white French woman, and she believes in ecofeminism and a socialist green feminist France. So the main bulk I want this video essay to cover is basically how does the show encourage us to challenge political systems? And there's 4 different types of analysis that I want to grab from what I've seen of the show. Set of radical policies and institutional pushback, real life parallels, so how it's a commentary on the things that we're experiencing today, comedy as a political weapon, and finally the character arcs in themselves as political metaphors. Manger bien, payer rien, which basically means eat well for nothing or eat well for free. And Stéphane's idea was that supermarket organic food is free.
Manger bien pour rien, gratuitement. Moi, ce que je veux instaurer, c'est le droit de bien manger, ok? Imagine, tu prends ton caddie, tu vas dans un supermarché, tu peux le remplir comme tu veux, tant que c'est bio, avec des produits en circuit court, locaux, et tu ressors sans rien payer.
Season 2, Stéphane's actually able to launch this policy in Guadeloupe, and he finances it with a tax called the Becquet tax, which is a tax which basically taxes descendants of white slave owners from France who are living in Guadeloupe and Martinique. And that tax money, instead of being it, let's say, instead of it going to all people divided equally who are residing in Guadeloupe or Martinique, it instead goes to the policy of eat well for free. I feel like that policy was received as a radical policy simply because of the institutional pushback. People are immediately questioning, how was this funded? Is it possible? Is it possible for people to actually eat for free? The second main policy that Stefan also talks about is called Vivre Ensemble, which basically means living together. And his whole idea was using empty housing for people not to for people to commute into central Paris, because it tended to be that a lot of people who are working class or relatively poorer, who lived on the suburbs of Paris, who had to commute into Paris, were actually spending so much money. Let's use the empty housing that is in the middle, that is in the center of Paris, where people need to get to, and give it to people who actually need it at an affordable price. And in the show, he meets with housing associations, mayors, and people are immediately like,
how am I going to get my money? I'm a landlord. How am I going to get my rent?
Le principe, le vivre ensemble, on n'a rien contre, monsieur le président. Mais les propriétaires que je représente, ils ont dû emprunter pour les payer, ces appartements. Ils ont des crédits à rembourser. Ils font comment?
Vous savez ce qu'on va faire? Pour une fois, on va faire passer l'intérêt collectif devant votre petit égoïsme bourgeois. Parce que sinon, nous, on réquisitionne tous les logements vides. Et on le fera, c'est clair?
Comment on peut faire pour que des pauvres habitent dans des quartiers riches, hein? C'est tout ce que je veux. On pourrait pas bosser pour une fois, main dans la main, ensemble, dans l'intérêt commun?
Ah, non merci, pardon, mais on pense d'abord à nos intérêts. Et croyez-moi, tous les Français sont pareils.
Non.
Idea that people are paying to live and survive on a plot of land to a specific landlord is actually something that has been normalized, but that's not to say that that's always been the case. There are times in society where people saw land not something that can be owned and bought by a specific person, but either there's an ancestral connection, we have an ancestral tie to the land because it's been in family for generations, or there's a spiritual tie to the land where you don't see land as something that can be bought and sold, but land in fact is actually its own entity. It's its own person, it's its own being. So for you to have ownership over something that already has its own autonomy, that already has its own sense of self, some people would actually say that's absurd. So I feel like again, just that in itself is the show encouraging us to challenge political systems, because the show is demonstrating the institutional pushback where people are like, how are we going to fund people having free food? How are we going to fund people having free housing? Yet the whole idea of people starving when there is food available, the whole idea of people having to either be homeless or living further out when there is housing available. Why are we not seeing that as illogical? Why are we not seeing that as absurd? So again, just to wrap up that first thought, I feel like the show encourages us to challenge political systems by demonstrating those opposing thoughts and opposing ideas and the institutional pushback. I feel like it challenges us to ask, why can't these things happen? Why? Why can't these things happen? Because of money? Not even real. Sorry. So my second analysis is to do with the real life parallels. One of the reasons why I really resonated with the show and why I feel like a lot of people would resonate with the show is because of the real life parallels you can either learn from the show, especially if you're not someone that's living in France. I feel like it provided an insight into, I don't know, the experience of people of color who are living in France, and also of just issues that probably a lot of French citizens are thinking about, but also made me reflect as well as a Black British person and my experience of what the political system is right now. So the first real life parallel, Stefan and his team go to the French Caribbean in season 2 because his wife has been kidnapped, and he gets to Guadeloupe. People in Guadeloupe are angry, they are frustrated, the problem of Chlordecone. And there's even signs that are saying like Chlordecone everywhere, justice nowhere. And basically, I didn't know what that meant. I was like, Chlordecone, like, who is she?
Et pour la chlordécone, tu as l'intention de faire quoi?
Dis ça.
J'ai pas compris, c'est quoi chlordécone?
C'est un pesticide qui nous empoisonne.
Ah oui, c'est ça.
That Chlordecone was basically used in the French Caribbean banana plantations until 1993, and this has led to severe environmental and health consequences.
Ecological catastrophe and a health disaster, because 92% of the population has been shown to have traces of chlordecone in their bloodstream.
In 1976, the U.S. banned the use of chlordecone after scientific studies proved it was dangerous. But banana plantations in the French West Indies continued to use it until 1993. Martinique currently has one of the highest number of prostate cancer cases in the world.
I was a farmer at the Casapolo plantation, and I developed cancer because of the level of chlordecone in my blood.
For 7 years, I was a paediatrician in this ward, and at that time we saw so many premature babies.
And even though it was banned in France in 1990, the effects still persist as the chemicals remain in the soil and water. And activists in the French Caribbean have been demanding accountability and compensation from the French state. And the French state only acknowledged this issue in 2018. And a lot of people see chlordecone as a legacy of exploitation, which is basically also akin to a new form of colonialism. And the fact that it was only after more than 10 years of campaigning by French Caribbean politicians that President Macron accepted the state's responsibility. And Macron even acknowledged that this was an environmental scandal and said that France was suffering from collective blindness over this issue. A law was created to start a compensation fund for agricultural workers, which has now been passed. And even after researching this, apparently payouts began in the past year or so. Demonstration, the portrayal of that in the show, again covered with humor and obviously a lot of drama and theatrics. I do feel like that encourages us to challenge political systems simply based off the concept of spreading awareness for people who don't know that this is an injustice that is going on and that people are still reaping the repercussions of colonialism, of slavery, of racism. And I also feel like it's a reminder, it's a motivation for advocacy to highlight, to speak up for people in the French Caribbean whose voices aren't being heard on a global scale. Back to the show, Stefan basically obviously sees the anger, sees the frustration, and one of the ideas is, how about we visit a distillery? How about we, focus on, I don't know, rum and music.
Je t'ai trouvé une visite d'une petite distillerie, ça va défoncer, tu vas voir.
Non mais attends, c'est bon les clichés là. Ça y est, nos Antilles, c'est le rhum, le zouk, c'est ça ton truc? Non, maintenant qu'on est là, on va faire un truc utile. Je sais pas, on va aller sur une place à Pointe-à-Pitre, on va inaugurer une stèle Aimé Césaire, un truc comme ça, je sais pas, un truc qui a du sens.
Ok, d'accord, c'est moi les clichés.
Bah quoi?
Aimé Césaire, c'est le cliché entier absolu.
How are we dealing with these situations? Are we seeing politicians just, oh yeah, let's visit a distillery and show them that we love their music? Or are we actually paying attention to Black suffering and making sure that people are getting reparations, that people are actually being listened to and heard? As soon as I was thinking about it, it reminded me of when Dave said in his song Black, loud in our suffering, no. Big and loud in our suffering, no.
Confusing to the culture, they're in love with it. Never seem to help with all the things we know would come with it. Loud in our laughter, silent in our suffering.
That line encompasses a lot of Black diasporan experiences in terms of being very loud in our joy, whether it be in the sense of entertainment, us always being at the forefront, in terms of spearheading and being leaders and being forerunners for music, for art, for acting. But then when it comes to the struggles that we may face, whether it is about chlordecone, whether it is about cobalt, whether it is about a war, whether it is about gold, whether it is about oil, all of a sudden everybody's on mute. What you bring productivity wise, what you bring entertainment wise, but then when it comes to hearing our voices with the things that we are struggling with, which are due to things that they started, systems that they created, systems that they imposed. Crazy work. So before I move on to my next analysis as comedy as a political weapon, I do feel like there are more real life parallels that were discussed in the show, whether that be talking about anti-colonial diplomacy, where he, says a comment like, maybe we should just remove French soldiers from African countries. Come on. Do you see what this show is tapping into? Do you see what this show is able to do? Bringing to the forefront conversations that people are having on a day-to-day, bringing at the forefront political discussions, political contestations that people are having within countries, especially something like anti-colonial diplomacy, especially when taking into consideration France's legacy of colonialism throughout the globe. Hey, good stuff. I personally really like the way the show uses humor to lighten the load, because at the end of the day, politics is not a light and breezy topic, especially the politics of real life. I feel like there are politics as in the politics that you see in the buildings, National Assembly, Houses of Parliament, the White House, all these different places where maybe MPs or different politicians are having, discussions on what our day-to-day lives are going to be, whether that be globally and domestically. But I do feel like the real politics is on the day-to-day, the day-to-day things that we're facing, whether that be within our homes or within our public lives, in schools, at work, just on the street. And I do feel like those are not issues to be taken lightly. So I don't feel like politics is like this light and breezy topic that, you know, we should constantly joke about. But I do feel like, in one light, I feel like it's being lost in conversations. So I do feel like when there are shows like Represent who can talk about politics in a way that eases that heaviness that people feel, again, I feel like it's a great way to start conversations, especially when these are things are they're very, very topical. This is not based in the past. This is very much rooted and grounded in the present, especially as someone who is in the UK. We literally have one of our first black leaders for parties, you know, the Conservative Party, and Kemi Badenoch, the first ever black prime minister in the UK, and it could be a black woman. I feel like those are conversations to discuss. Again, this is a black woman who understands politics, who has a strong political career, so it's very different to Stefan Blake. I feel like humor is a great way to, you know, disarm people. It's a great way to reduce people's walls and allow people to have more conversations and allow more people to be open.
I'm editing, I'm reminded of two papers that I read in uni called Laughter Resistance and Ambivalence in Trevor Noah's stand-up comedy, Returning Mimicry as Mockery, and also just an article on politics and popular culture. And it just reminded me of how laughter and comedy can be in terms of stimulating really powerful and dominant discourses about power, race, gender, class, just literally the social and economic and political state of the world right now. Because how powerful is humour that it can make us question our wisdom, provoke critical thinking, and also generate solidarity, especially through the means of educating us as to what is going on in the world. And in terms of the latter article that I mentioned as well, there was even a reference to something like The Daily Show and how that is enhancing people's political knowledge through comedy. And I feel like other shows, obviously Represent is not exactly the same as The Daily Show, but it still has the same ability to communicate political knowledge. I think Represent is doing that really well. It's a demonstration of how powerful comedy and laughter and humour can be.
I think it's still important to highlight the use of comedy that is done in a way that, I guess it depends on people's level of comedy and their humour and what their boundaries are in terms of what can be joked about. Even when, you know, discussing topics such as terrorism in France, which is definitely a sensitive topic and should definitely be treated lightly, the policing of hijabi women in France as well.
Il faut agir avec fermeté, avec ces terroristes. Je ne veux pas que se reproduisent ces terribles événements du 13 novembre. Plus jamais ça.
Moi, j'ai perdu un cousin là-bas.
Ah bon?
Voilà.
Excuse-moi. Votre cousin, il était de quel côté?
Du côté de ma mère?
Non, je veux dire, de quel côté? Il était chez... C'était... Ouh.
Non, c'est une question légitime.
Oui.
Ah, parce que vous êtes sérieux?
Discussion on misogyny, you know, in the political career. There's discussions on reparations. There's discussion on poverty. The fact that humor is able to pierce its way through all of those topics in a way that I don't feel like is distasteful, I feel like, again, shows how good the show is in terms of, you know, entertainment. But I also feel like it does a good job of bringing things to light that might not be able to be brought to light in just mainstream TV and on the news. I really do enjoy the characters that were put in the show. Upon looking at other French people's opinions on the show, because who knows, there might be some French people who do feel like the show isn't accurately portraying their political experiences. But when I was trying to do research as to, I wonder what people are thinking of the show, there was a lot of criticism in terms of how the women are written, their involvement in Stefan's campaign and candidacy. And I do see that in terms of Stefan's wife, Stefan's mother, and the role that they do play in the show, how they move the show. I feel like there's space to invest in those characters more, but I do feel like they aren't portrayed in a way that's too surface level. I don't think they're portrayed in a way that's too flat. I feel like there is some multifacetedness about Stefan's wife, whether it be her journey in terms of IVF in season 1, her talking about her passion about reparations, anti-colonial diplomacy, whether it be Stefan's mum and her being a prayerful woman.
Je te bénis dans le sang puissant de Jésus. Je brise toute la chaîne des ennemis dans le sang puissant de Jésus. Dis Amen. Amen. Je te bénisse, mon fils, je te protège.
Amen.
Pourquoi tu me fais ce coup-là? Je te protège, mon fils. Ils sont vaincus au nom de Jésus.
You feel like, yeah, there is some multifacetedness about the women, but I definitely feel like there's always room for improvement. But again, I do feel like all the characters push the plot in a way that is very entertaining. The characters are funny, but they are also insightful. They all I feel like represent different people's opinions on politics, and be people like Yasmin, who is a hijabi woman in France, and the things that she has to endure whilst being on Stefan's team, whether it be the misogyny, whether it be the Islamophobia, that is someone's real reality. So I do really enjoy the characters on the show, and specifically the two characters that I want to use as political metaphors are Corinne and Stefan. I feel like Corinne is a white French woman who is clearly probably the most radical person on that show. She is some people's biggest nightmare and also some people's biggest dream.
Moi, je gouverne et je veux une France sociale, écologiste, féministe.
You know, her beliefs in terms of ecofeminism, in terms of socialism, it can scare people. And the policies that she even discusses, she talks about permit to have 3 kids, abolishing nuclear power, menstrual leave. And even though some of these things, like menstrual leave, is actually quite common in certain countries, they've been doing it for years, she's seen as too radical. And she actually ends up quitting her job as Prime Minister, and she decides to go back to her original job and being with her local community and creating change there. It demonstrates to us, what does that mean? Us to question, you know, how much change can we make in electoral systems? Her opting out, I feel like, is truly the definition of radical, especially from the definition of radical that I really like from Miss Matu, who got their definition from the book 20 Enemies by James Forman. They talk about how radical in its political use means.
Radical in its political use means to depart significantly from the systems we have in place. It means that you have the intent to transform or replace fundamental elements in society, and you position yourself to do so. Imagine like a radical electron that is sitting on the outskirts of an element, right? And it has the capacity to bind to something else, which fundamentally changes the structure that of the element that it once belonged to, okay? You can tell pretty easily if something is truly radical because it will meet significant institutional pushback. The systems that we have in place are ingrained because of our mass participation. The systems that we have are so ubiquitous because everyone participates all the time. So when someone refuses to participate and they are actively creating a new thing, a new system, that is an open threat to the systems that we have ingrained in society, okay? It is met with pushback.
I really like the call to action of positioning yourself to do so. It's not just about, recognizing something to be radical or recognizing a policy that is wrong or that is unfair or that is unjust. But actually, was it unjust? Unjust. I think it's unjust. But actually, what am I going to do about it now? What are the ways in my life that I can be radical, that I can go against, you know, the system in my own way, in my day-to-day, with my community, with my friends, with my peers, with my family, with the people that I work with. So I do feel like Corinne really is the epitome of radical. This encourages us to challenge political systems in a way of questioning, what role can we play? Sometimes the answers might be outside the system. So moving on to Stefan, I really like Stefan's character. Obviously, he's the main character. He is very silly, very unserious. But one thing about him is that he tries. He's trying. He's genuinely trying to make a difference.
Que tous les Français se réveillent chaque matin en sachant que la France est pour eux, qu'il y ait de l'égalité, de la justice et la santé pour tout le monde. C'est ça mon programme. Je veux que tout le monde soit bien. En fait, mon programme, c'est la France mleh.
C'est quoi encore ça? Hein? La France blé?
Non, pas la France blé, la France mleh. C'est de l'arabe. Mleh, ça veut dire bien, frais, posé, frais, quoi. Voilà, c'est ça mon programme.
Another great part about Stefan's character as a political metaphor, him recognizing how hard it is to actually get the work that he wants to do done. Being elected was hard, but now actually getting people to actually vote on the policies that I want is even harder. And I think, again, that shows the downfalls or the barriers of electoral systems, of political systems, the current political systems that we are operating in. How much change can we actually enact even when we get in the space? Because Stefan is now struggling to even put forward the things that got him in as president in the first place. Again, what is that encouraging us to challenge? The last part is Stefan's hope. I think that's one, not even I think, I know that is a word that is used to describe Stefan quite frequently throughout the show. His hope, whether his hope being dangerous, his hope being silly, his hope being just insane, but he has hope. He is motivated to make France a better country for everyone in France. And even though his hope might be perceived negatively, it's actually what I believe what we need. All of Stefan's decisions come from a place of loving his community, of loving his family. And his whole campaign talks about how the real solutions come from below. And I really do feel like this part of the analysis encourages us to challenge political systems in a way of maintaining hope. It has to get better. It has to get better, and we're going to make it better, if that makes sense. So I really like Stefan's character in that sense of he is an optimist. You know, it's rare in the 2 seasons that he feels defeated. I really respect that about his character. And I feel like it is something that a lot of us can learn from. So, closing thoughts, circling back to how Jean-Pascal Zadi said shows like this can expand our imagination. I feel like, in contrast to that, a lot of shows and films or series help us imagine so many ways the world can end. There are so many ways that we know the world can end: zombies, mass health outbreaks, war, climate change, which are all, some obviously more truer than others, but we have a lot of content that allows us to have that imagination. There are so many, even from books to movies to TV shows, there are so many pieces of art that provide us with the imagination of how the world can end. But is there an equal number of art that provides us with the imagination to think of how the world can be better? How can we fix the world? How can we change the world? How can we ensure that there is no more poverty? How can we ensure that there is no more homelessness? How can we ensure that there is no more war? Are there shows that actually aid us to do that? You know, I feel like it's great that a show like Represent was created to almost provide that kind of insight into, wait, imagine if, because the same way, what all the shows are doing, like whether it be Severance, whether it be Maze Runner, whether it be Hunger Games, whether it be Divergent, whether it be, what's the one where everyone has to whisper or cover their eyes? I forgot. Whether it be I Am Legend, like all of these shows, they give us that kind of, oh, what if? What if we all got infected and became zombies? That's what all these shows are doing. It's like, what if? It's stimulating your imagination, like, what if? But at the end of the day, they're all reflections of the current times and realities that we're living in. And I feel like we need shows like Represent that show what if, and not what if that makes you think, oh, we're cooked. But wow, what if it's like, oh, we can cook. Does that make sense? We need series that help us imagine ways that the world can progress and change for the better. It reminds me of something that I learned in my post-colonial class, like that one quote of, it's so much easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And that can be replaced with so many different things. It is so much easier for people to come up with ways that the world can end. But then actually, how about let's think of ways that we can change the world, shift the world, you know, turn the world on its head in a way that is actually beneficial for people. Show encourages us to challenge ourselves by suggesting new ways of imagining. Imagination is so key to changing the world, because how will you work to make the world a better place if you don't even know what that better place looks like? If you don't even know what you're working towards, if you don't even know, what does a better world look like to you? You know, does it look like, you know, people being able to live together for affordable housing? If it starts there, then that's what you know what you're working towards. If it looks like people being able to eat for free and children not having to starve, then at least you know what you're working towards. If it looks like no weapons of mass destruction, then you know what you're working towards and you're motivated to do that. If you don't know what you're working for, then how hard will you work for it? Literally all living inside someone's imagination. Someone conceptualized the reality that we're living in right now, or a group of people did it. And those people, they dreamt of destruction. So why can't we dream of liberation? Like, I feel like Represent critiques the system and offers something better in a way that is grounded in reality. And to me, the first thing in terms of like imagining, especially in the context of Black people or people of the Black diaspora, or African diaspora rather, it reminds me of obviously the idea of Afrofuturism, envisioning this alternate reality for a Black cultural lens. And obviously one of the biggest is Black Panther. You know, an alternate universe where colonialism never happens definitely is up for critique, which is part of art anyway. I feel like one thing that I enjoy about Represent is how much grounded it is in reality. Black Panther is very distant. Again, it's an alternate reality. Very, very distant, because colonialism has happened. But Represent, this is now. It is tangible. It is a show that contains people you see in your everyday life. It's an alternate reality that's not too far. It can happen. And that is why I feel like imagination is so important, because we have so many people who are enabling the imagination of a world where it is normal for people to suffer. And I think it's up to us, it's up to art like this that triggers us to dream of something better. So I really like Represent. It's not just entertaining, but it's just allowing you to dream. Dream a bit bigger, just ever so slightly. Because what if, you know, we actually were working towards a world without hunger, without nuclear weapons, without people being homeless? You know, what would that vision look like? And even though it's not the most, I don't think Represent actually is probably the most radical thing in the world, but I feel like it's a start. It's a start. So yeah. that is how Blas challenges us to be radical, in quotation marks. So yeah, that's it. Good job. Good job.